Research is my passion. Muscle and strength are my pursuits. I'm a powerlifter, bodybuilder, scientist, and coach. I'm Layne Norton. I am a physique architect.
Squat!
I used to be that guy going into the gym with chicken legs. Why? Because I wouldn't squat. I made up every excuse you could think of as to why I shouldn't squat. They're bad for the knees, they're bad for the back, they're hard. Well, I didn't say that out loud, but I certainly thought it. So I used every other exercise I could think of, and my legs were still tiny. One day I had an epiphany. I'm going to squat over 500 pounds for reps, and I will assume I will get big legs from that. After years and years of work, learning proper technique and programming, I did squat over 500 pounds for reps, with a top squat ever of 655 for a single, and my legs are no longer twigs, I'm happy to say. Guys, if you want big legs, there's one rule: you gotta squat. In this video, I'm gonna show you tips and techniques I've learned over the years from working with top coaches in the squat to teach you how to squat more safely and effectively using big weights. Let's get into it. Before I actually get into teaching the squat, there's one aspect of squatting I'd like to talk about that often gets overlooked, and that's equipment. Now, I'm not talking about a bar or a rack. I'm talking about things that you actually put on yourself. Now, I would never tell you that you need equipment to squat. All you need is yourself. But I'm a big fan of things that I can put on and immediately be better. Things that will make you squat more safely and efficiently. The first one is footwear. Most people wear tennis shoes, but unfortunately tennis shoes are one of the worst things you can use. The purpose of a tennis shoe is to distribute the load over your entire foot, and it's also to cushion you against impact. In a squat, you're pressing down against the earth, and physics dictate that the earth presses back up against you. If you have on a cushioned shoe, you're going to lose some of that energy transfer. It's also going to make you unstable. Many of you who squat in sneakers probably notice that you feel like your knees cave in and you're wobbly. So at minimum, you want a hard-soled shoe. Now, I am a huge fan of Olympic lifting squat shoes. The great thing about squat shoes is not only do they have a hard sole, but they also have a slightly elevated heel. This puts you in a more ergonomic position for squatting and allows you to push off your heel and midfoot better. The next piece of equipment I'd like to talk about is a weight belt. I'm not talking about your weight belts that are flimsy and Velcro. I'm talking about a buckle belt that's made of stiff leather. A good belt will give something for your abdominal core to brace against. This will protect your lower back and keep you more upright during a squat. Now, many people ask me, Layne, but if I wear a belt, my core will get less activation and it will weaken my core. That's actually not true. The research shows that wearing a belt, if anything, increases core activation for two reasons. One, wearing a belt gives you something to actively push out against, and so your abdominal wall pushes against it harder. Two, you can use more weight and thus get more core activation. One other thing about wearing a belt is most people don't wear it properly. They wear it too low. It is not meant to go around your waist. It is meant to go around where your abdominal wall is going to push out during a squat. So I prefer to wear it a little bit higher than most people wear it. As for what kind of belt, I just recommend buying a belt from a reputable company that is either 10 or 13 millimeter that's 4 inches thick. Another piece of equipment we should talk about is knee sleeves and knee wraps. I personally prefer knee sleeves for a multitude of reasons. The biggest of which is that knee wraps simply take too long to get on and off. They'll slow you down during your workout, and further, there is some evidence that placing that kind of pressure on the patella may not be optimal. Also, when I'm using weights, I like to know that I'm moving the weight, and I'm not getting a PR just simply because I wrap my knees tighter. With knee sleeves, you get a consistent pressure each time that's repeatable, and they're easy to get on and off. They still warm the knee joint and provide some level of protection. The next piece of equipment I recommend isn't really equipment, but still important nonetheless. Good chalk. Now people might say, what the heck do you need chalk for? As we'll discuss coming up, bar position can make a huge difference, and in a low bar squat, chalk can help keep the bar on your back and keep it from rolling. So I recommend getting a good block of chalk and using that to help keep the bar in position on your back while you squat. The last piece of equipment I want to talk about is wrist wraps. For those of you who do high bar squats, wrist wraps may not be necessary. But for those that prefer a lower bar position, wrist wraps are extremely helpful. Wrist wraps will help keep your wrists straighter and prevent elbow and wrist pain from squatting in a low bar position. One mistake people make with wrist wraps is they usually wrap too low. They wrap below the wrist joint. You want to wrap above and below the wrist joint. This will provide more support for the wrist and keep it in a better position. One of the most overlooked aspects of a squat is the setup. I see so many people get under the bar and just rush right into it. You should have a consistent, pre-planned plan that you repeat every time you go to do a squat. You want to get yourself underneath the bar and in the proper bar position, whether it be low bar or high bar. You want your feet completely under the bar. Remember, your midfoot is your center of gravity. When you're ready to squat, take a large breath in, brace your abdominal wall, and unrack the bar. The easiest way to do this is to squeeze your glutes forward, and this will simply pop the bar right off the rack. I recommend against quadding the bar out of the rack. That is simply where you bend your knees and try to use your quads to take all the weight. Use your biggest and strongest muscle groups, your hips, your lower back, your hamstrings, and your quads to unrack the weight. Most of you out there are probably used to a high bar position. A high bar position is where the bar sits on top of the trapezius muscles. A low bar position is where the bar sits about 2 inches lower on top of your rear delts. So what are the advantages and disadvantages to each? A high bar squat usually makes it easier to stay in a little bit more upright stance for some people. It also is a more comfortable position. A low bar position is a bit more uncomfortable because your shoulders are bunched up. But one advantage to the low bar position is that around 95% of people are going to be more powerful in this position and able to use more weight. Now they will start out with a little bit more forward lean, but when they get to the lower part of the squat, they'll be able to keep more spine neutrality than people who use a high bar position. So why is it easier to keep better spine neutrality with a low bar position? Because the bar is further away from your pivot point, your hips, there is more torque on your lower back when you hit the bottom of a squat. By using a low bar position, this reduces the amount of torque on your lower back. So how do you know which one is better for you? I recommend trying both. But in general, people with shorter legs and longer torsos are going to be more able to use a high bar squat position. Whereas people who have longer legs and a shorter torso are probably better off with a low bar position, as this will reduce the amount of torque on their lower back when they lean forward. So how do you find where to put the bar during a low bar squat? Grab the bar relatively narrow as you comfortably can. Put it on top of your traps where you'd usually keep it. Then simply slide it to the next shelf down. You'll feel the bar catch, and that is your low bar position. Now that you've unracked the bar, you're ready to walk out. I like the 3-step walkout. It's efficient, simple, and repeatable. Once you've unracked the weight, let it settle. Don't immediately start trying to walk backwards. But when you're ready, take a small step with one of your feet backwards. Once that foot is set and settled, then take another small step backwards with your other foot. That second step actually plants your first foot. Then, with your other foot that you took the first step with, take a small step back to line it up with your second step. Once your feet are in position, you can adjust your stance width slightly. Again, I don't recommend a super wide or super narrow stance. I recommend a stance that you would be in if you were going to do a standing jump. The last thing I want to talk about is toe point position. You don't want too exaggerated of a toe point. If you're anywhere near 45 degrees, it's too much. But an easy way to find out where you probably should be, once you're in your squat stance, squeeze your glutes and your feet will rotate naturally. Wherever they wind up, that's probably your optimal position for your toe point. Now you're ready to squat. The first and possibly the most important aspect of squatting is simply breathing. Most people don't take in near enough air. So the first thing you want to do once you're in position is take in a deep breath, as much air as you can get. If you do not breathe deep enough, you cannot brace as hard, and thus makes it more difficult to maintain spine neutrality during a heavy squat. Now many of you have been told, breathe in on the way down on an exercise and breathe out on the way up. It's completely wrong. You can generate your most force when you're holding your breath. Now what do I mean by bracing? I'm not talking about flexing your abs. I'm talking about Once you pull your air in, push out your abdominal wall as much as you possibly can. If I was going to throw a punch and hit you in the stomach, what would you do to prepare for that? You would brace. You want to do the same thing when you squat. Many people just say, just arch your lower back. But that's the wrong cue when you squat. Your abdominal wall is what stabilizes your lower back. Yes, you want your lower back neutral, but just simply arching will not be sufficient to keep it neutral. You want to make sure you're bracing. Taking in a deep breath and pushing out your abdominal wall as hard as you can will not only protect your lower back, but it will also help keep you more upright in the squat. Most people think about the squat as simply an up and down movement, but it's not. It's also back and forth. You want to start the squat with your hips. You want to start by driving your hips back and sitting down between your legs. This is the best cue I can give you. By using your hips and glutes, you're recruiting your biggest, most powerful muscle groups and joints. Once you've achieved depth, if you're braced correctly, you should start to come up on your own without even having to think about pressing. But as you start coming up, don't think about simply just pushing up. Think about also driving your hips forward and squeezing your glutes as you lock out. Even if you're halfway up in a squat, you can lock it out simply by driving your hips forward and not even having to think about drive up anymore. Now that we've talked about what to do to the hips and glutes, what do we do with our knees? As we begin to sit down in between our legs and drive our hips back, we also want to drive our knees out slightly. You want to make sure that you're driving your knees out over where your toes point. So if your feet are pointed forward, your knees should mostly track in that same line. If they're pointed out, you should push your knees out slightly, tracking them in the same line as your feet. One of the things you don't want to do is have your knees shoot forward, however. One of two things typically happens when you lead with your knees in a squat. One, because you're pushing your knees out further, your calves tighten and it causes you to have to fold forward in order to achieve depth. This increases the likelihood of spine flexion much more. The second thing that happens is because their calves get tight, people sense this and they stop well short of parallel. In order to maximize gains in strength and hypertrophy, you want to take yourself through a good range of motion. By keeping a more upright shin angle, this is going to help save your knees and put less torque on them. We talked about squeezing our glutes forward. One benefit of this is this pulls your glutes into alignment with your spine and also pulls the bar completely into alignment with your body. Now your lower back isn't just supporting the bar, your entire skeletal structure is. As you finish the movement, lock your glutes out so that it pulls the bar back into alignment again. The last part of the squat execution is talking about back angles. As I alluded to earlier, back angles are going to be very individual. One of the things I hear a lot is people telling other people that they should squat more upright. And while it's true, you should squat as upright as you reasonably can, that is going to be different for every person depending upon their structure. For somebody who has long femurs and a short torso, they're going to need significantly more forward lean to achieve depth and keep the bar over their midfoot. For somebody with shorter femurs, they may be able to squat very upright with very minimal forward lean. The most important part, regardless of how much you lean forward, is making sure you maintain spine neutrality. I've talked a lot about this term, but let's discuss it briefly. Spine neutrality essentially means that your back is straight. Even if you're leaning forward slightly, your back is straight. What you don't want to have happen is go into flexion. Flexion is where you lose the neutrality in your spine and you cave forward. That is dangerous because it places uneven pressure on the discs in your back. Now we're going to get into actually what makes a good squat. The number one thing is making sure you get deep enough. Proper depth means your hip joint will go slightly below your knee joint. I think you should squat as deep as you safely can. For some people with longer limbs, they're not going to be able to go all the way down without losing neutrality in their spine. In that case, they should stop before they get to that point. But almost everybody can learn to do a good parallel or below squat. The next thing we're going to talk about is bar path. The bar path is the path the bar takes as you travel down and up during the squat. The proper bar path is going to start with the bar directly above your midfoot, and it should stay as close to the center of your midfoot as possible throughout the entire movement. That way, the bar is directly over your center of gravity, and you get the maximum force transmission from your feet to the bar. Now, even with a really good squat, you may not have a completely straight line, but the fewer deviations from straight you have, the more efficient the squat is going to be, and the easier it's going to be. This brings me to another point. I hear a lot of people say, never lean forward on a squat. And while it's true you should keep your back angle as upright as possible, this is going to be different for every person. If you have long legs, in order to keep the bar over your center of gravity and achieve proper depth, you must lean forward. Now you want to minimize that amount of forward lean, but you're going to have some. Leaning forward in and of itself is not inherently dangerous. The key is to make sure you always maintain spine neutrality. In this video, I've given you the tools you need to squat heavy, safely, and efficiently. But don't be surprised if you're not perfect the first time. In fact, I promise you, you won't be. I'm learning and relearning every single time. Remember, practice makes perfect. Many of us don't think about lifting as a skill, but it's a skill. And the more frequently you practice it, the better you will get. So even if you're not training heavy, it can still be useful to go in, put light weight on the bar, and just do the movement. Don't neglect your warm-up sets. It's not just for you getting warm, it's also practice. The more times you do it, the better it will be ingrained in your motor pattern. Remember, if you treat lightweight like it's heavy, one day you will treat heavyweight like it's light. If you have any questions about this video or anything I've discussed, please feel free to find me on Body Space and on my website. For more great videos and articles like this from me and other experts, make sure to keep coming back to bodybuilding.com.